Thank you very much. As all of you know, we have just completed a series of meetings which began Sunday evening here with the presidents, the board of directors. I would describe it as a very, very thoughtful and candid meeting, which showed a great deal of unity and strength in the conference. We first took up the question of whether or not the conference should expand at this time, whether it should remain an active agenda item for the board of directors. We decided after very thorough discussion that we would remain at 10 members. We committed ourselves to that proposition and each other, and along with that discussion and that decision to remain at 10 members at this time, also there were very, very strong series of commitments and comments made by every single member of the board, every single president representing our institutions, of our very strong commitment to the Big 12, to the strength and stability of this conference. I have never heard since I've been on the board such strong commitments and such a unified sense of purpose on the board. So I would say that as we look at the whole outcome of this meeting, it was a very, very positive meeting in terms of expressing the cohesion of this conference and the unity of this conference on this issue. The procedure, so that because I've seen speculation that there was discussion of individual schools, or there were a series of considerations of whether there was support, a supermajority for any admission of any particular school. There was no such discussion. We had no discussion of individual schools in the sense of taking votes on individual schools, trying to sense support for individual schools. We've gone through a very thoughtful process here in the course of the last year or so in terms of looking at options to strengthen the conference, because we all want to see a stronger Big 12 conference. We feel we're very strong already. If you look at the outcome of national competitions and championships this last year, the conference is in very good position from an athletics point of view. It continues to be one to which we aspire to improve and to show ourselves in competition on the field and on the court to continue to be worthy of national levels, high national levels of competition. At our past board meeting, as all of you remember, when we released the per school financial allocations, we had this year, of course, the largest financial allocations on a per school basis in the history of the Big 12 Conference. So I would say that the state of the conference overall in the modern period has been strong athletically, stable and strong financially as well, as we looked at the results this last time. So the decision to remain at the number where we are, we feel we have a very good model for competing with each other and many other advantages. We're a conference that can move, and we are still looking at changes in technology, for example, and how our conference might be a leader in utilizing technological change for the benefit of the members of the conference. The decision was unanimous. The decision was unanimous. It was all of the schools participated very actively in the decision. So once that decision was made, once we decided that this issue would no longer stay on the agenda, we decided to move on. We've gone through a process which I think all of you understand, to look at ways in which we could strengthen the Big 12, and we've looked at a number of options. One of the options we looked at, of course, was the championship game, which is being implemented today. Our athletic directors have taken charge of that process in terms of mechanically putting that process together. We feel we're on a good track, making progress. At the appropriate time, they will speak for themselves, not today, but at the appropriate time on the process that will be followed in that regard. So that was one of the things that we looked at. We also, as you recall, thought another way we should look at potentially strengthening the conference, and this is a full comprehensive approach that we've gone through in a very methodical way, was exploring the possibility of a Big 12 network, our own conference network. And after a good bit of discussion on this matter and discussion with media partners and others, we found that the marketplace made a decision for us, in essence, that that was something that was not going to move forward at this particular point of time. And so we've explored that. We've had a great amount of discussion, as I mentioned, about new technologies. And then, of course, we have looked in a very methodical way, and we appreciate the efforts of the Commissioner and others here at the Big 12 for the very thorough manner in which we've looked at and examined the possibility of whether an expansion would be advisable at this point in time. And let me say, I think we all feel deep gratitude for those colleges and universities that have indicated interest in being a part of the Big 12. And while we have made a decision, there are quality universities, quality both in academic terms and in athletic terms. And while we have made a decision that it's right now it's the best for us to stay where we are, to keep our options open about all the ways in which we can move to strengthen the conference. We do very much appreciate their interest. I think the fact that so many schools of such stature expressed interest in the Big 12 at this point in time is, again, another sign of strength of the conference. But I would say also to all of those who participated, we have all taken notice of, and we've learned a great deal about these universities and their athletic programs. So the time they have spent in informing us, informing the Commissioner, informing the board, it is time and effort certainly not wasted, because it gives us a very good indication of these schools, what they're about, and the strengths that they have. So that process has been very thorough, very fair, and I commend the Commissioner for the thoroughness in which, and I think all of our members do, the thoroughness in which this study was undertaken. And as I've learned, what might be timely or the right time right now to expand, and that we all came to a unanimous feeling that this was not the right time. All the information generated is not wasted effort, I would say, to those schools that have participated, and they have certainly presented themselves in a very fine light, and we appreciate them. So that is the action, and I know the Commissioner wants to add some additional words, and then we'll be happy to take your questions after that.
Thank you, President Boren, and thank you for leading a really productive meeting today. One of the things that will probably get asked later on is, did you make a recommendation to the CEOs? The answer to that is yes. I made one recommendation, and that was that we should bring this process to closure one way or the other. That we shouldn't kick the can down the road. We have undertaken an extensive data analysis process. That's the empirical part of what we did. There's certainly another more local element to the process, and each institution is expected to have their own sensitivities and their own priorities and their own perspectives on how that all fits together. Interestingly enough, our 10 presidents came together in unity and came to the same conclusion, and that was that we like the competition that we have. We like playing a full round robin. We're glad we added a championship game, and we think that we have, through an RFP process, identified some great sites for the hosting of our championship. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm around what that will do for us in terms of giving us an extra opportunity to compete at the highest levels. Our conference has always been about winning national championships, and that certainly includes the sport of football. But we also, as President Boren said, last year we had 16 teams, 16 sports where we finished in the top 4, including 3 national championships and I think 6 runners-up. We do a very good job of competing at the highest levels. We've got lots of great coaches. We've got lots of great student athletes. great venues, and there's a lot to celebrate. And so I think the decision in part was a celebration of what we have. I think that I would be remiss if I didn't echo my appreciation to the schools that self-identified and voluntarily got involved in this process. I learned a lot about a bunch of very fine universities. The decision really didn't have very much to do with the individual elements of those institutions. They all have their strengths and weaknesses, obviously, as all of our members do, but this was really about defense of our model, and we feel like a full round robin in football and a double round in men's and women's basketball, and we had 3 of the last 8 teams in the baseball tournament. We won a softball national championship. There's an awful lot to celebrate, and so we really, I would have to say, expressed more unity in this set of meetings than any before, and I think our leader can take some much deserved credit for that. But we have been through the empirical process, and aspirationally, what I wanted to do for our board and for our athletic directors is, when we got started in March of 2015, I wanted to get to the end of the process, or near the end of the process, with everybody singing off the same sheet music. Not contesting the components of what we're going to do to get better, not contesting the value of those things, but instead having an empirical roadmap that allowed all of us to make those uniquely institutional decisions. And in the end, we had good collaboration between our ADs and our chief executive officers. And we came to a point where I really feel good about the strength of our conference going forward. I think that this was really not a decision not to expand. This was an endorsement and a reinvestment in the strength of the 10 that we have. And so I feel very good about that. I think it was a deliberate process, one that included a lot of people. It was more public than many of these other processes have been. And as I mentioned, these were institutions that self-identified. We did not go out and solicit the participation of any institution. And so by the very nature of that, it was a little different process than some of the others have been. But I feel good about the outcome, and I feel very bullish about the future. So with that, we'll both be happy to answer your questions.
For those wishing to ask a question, please raise your hand, wait for the microphone, and then identify yourself. We'll start right here with you, Jake, on the aisle.
So just to be clear, the door on expansion has been closed. It's not something that the league is going to revisit anytime soon.
We do not consider it an active agenda item any longer. It is certainly not a decision where we would say we're never going to consider it again, but it's not an active agenda item at this time.
I think the one thing we've learned over the last several years is the landscape, including all parts of the landscape. That includes technologies, commercial atmosphere surrounding sports. A lot of things have changed. It's a constantly changing landscape, so we would never say never. But we do feel it would be wrong to indicate that it is an active agenda item, because it no longer is at this point.
Kevin?
President Bourne, at one time you characterized the league as psychologically disadvantaged, and I'm wondering what has changed your mind about that, and if so, if you regret that characterization.
Someone suggested I've had a brain transplant, but the rumors to that effect are not true. I would just say this: anytime you make a statement about anything, it has to do with the context in which you're saying it and the circumstances in which you're saying it, and the circumstances have radically changed. You know, my thoughts about expansion have really centered around the possibility in the past of whether or not we could have a conference network. And I felt that we were, at that time, disadvantaged because we did not have a conference a network, and I still wish that and hope someday, and who knows which form of technology it will take, we will perhaps someday have a branded conference network of some kind. But the circumstances have wildly changed, and if you don't adjust your thinking with changing circumstances, you're bound to be mistaken about where you are now. You can't afford to be rigid about that. And the circumstances have changed. As I said, and we said it the last time, at the last meeting, I believe, the marketplace has in essence made that decision for us. We cannot command the marketplace. Economic forces are at work in the marketplace. Technological change is at work at the marketplace. And therefore, we just realized that that had to be off the table at this point in time because marketplace made that decision for us. So I would say that was the situation then. I hoped we could find a way when we thought we could build a conference network and we needed additional material, additional schools to have additional material for the network, and to do that then I think would have made sense. The situation now is very, very different. As the commissioner said, I think we feel very comfortable with our scheduling model, with playing each other. We take great pride in the fact that we have had great success nationally. We take pride in the fact that our per capita distribution is certainly higher than it's ever been before in the Big 12. So we don't feel a sense of urgency to expand just for expansion's sake. It has to be tied to the circumstances at the time. I think this decision, and I think my colleagues felt this decision, left us very agile to look at all the possible ways in which we could strengthen our conference in the future, to look at new technologies and be able to deal with those in a quick basis. Bigger is not always better because sometimes it makes your decision making more ponderous, for example, more difficult the more schools you have involved. So just for a whole myriad of reasons, and as we walk through all of these steps, championship game, the network, the expansion, all of these possibilities, we just felt the right time. So I just have to say, I think circumstances have changed, and I think the network's off the table. That's the principal one with me. And so I think that that's calls for a change of adjustment of what your views are. If the circumstances change, you ought to change your thinking. That's a challenge to all of us. We're living through a period of such unimaginable change, and so we have to be able to be fleet of foot and adjust to changing circumstances.
Yeah, President Bourne, you talked about the commitment by each of the 10 schools. Did the extension of grant of rights come up, and was that broached as a way to show the stability of the conference? And if not, why not?
Why not? No, it did not come up, and I will tell you why. And I think there's been a lot of discussion, maybe some misunderstanding about position of our university or any other university about extension of the grants of rights. What I would tell you this, and let me give you just a preamble about that. As you know, I've been on this board since day one. I think I'm the only remaining president on this board that's been here since day one when the Big 12 Conference was formed. What I heard over the last 24 hours as our colleagues spoke very candidly among ourselves was the strongest expression of unity and cohesion and commitment to the conference that I've ever heard. In my opinion, there's not a single school in this conference that is looking to go elsewhere. And we are committed to each other. We're committed to the Big 12 Conference. We're committed to staying in the Big 12 Conference and making it as strong as possible. Now, the grant of rights has come up in the past at a time in which we have been negotiating contracts with our media partners and otherwise. So in other words, it's always been in the context of a proposed deal, if you want to say it that way, a proposed agreement that would lead to longer-term media contracts and with certain provisions in them. So that's when you consider grant of rights, and as we begin to approach the end of our current term of contract, which is approximately 8 years, I think undoubtedly you're going to see a whole series of discussions about what are the prospects, how will the contracts either be renewed or changed, or I mentioned new technologies perhaps will get involved when we get to that point, and we'll be ready to negotiate in the open marketplace, I think with great cohesion at that time. So that's to me, and that's certainly, I think, the feeling that we've had at the University of Oklahoma, that when that time comes, that's when you discuss the grant of rights. You don't discuss it as an abstract matter when there's really nothing on the table. So I would just say this to you. Does the University of Oklahoma have a theological position that does not favor a grant of rights? No. I think at the appropriate time, when the time comes, and as we approach those times and we have some idea of what the parameters are, I really believe that all the schools in this conference, and I include the University of Oklahoma among that number, will be prepared to go forward with the grant of rights when it's clearly in the interest of the kind of agreements we hope to have at that time. So I just want to underline, there is no theological or abstract opposition to a grant of rights at the University of Oklahoma. We're committed to this conference, and as I say, what I heard in that room gave me a tremendous amount of optimism. There have been times over the past in the history of the Big 12 when there's not been that unanimity in the room, that sense of unity, real cohesion, and sincere commitment. And no one's looking to walk away from this conference. And any feeling to the contrary is just mistaken. They don't understand the strong commitment that we all have to it. And at the appropriate time, when the appropriate proposal's on the table, we'll be able to go to the open market at the appropriate time, and we'll be able to, I think, negotiate very successfully. And I think the product of that will be a cooperation from all of our schools.
Do you two expect to get more money out of your television partners, ESPN and Fox, for not expanding? And along with that, would you kill the pro rata clause in the contract?
Well, I'm not going to get into a whole lot of specifics on our negotiations. We have a new piece of inventory with our championship game, and so we're in the process of discussions with both Fox and ESPN on that. There are components of the contract that we also talk about in the context of those changes, and we're going to continue to talk about those. But I think that when those things are completed, we'll go about the process of announcing them. But until then, I'm not prepared to talk about the specifics of any of them. And in fact, they're works in progress, and anything I would say would be highly preliminary. Yeah, there are a couple other little components that we deal with, but it's mostly championship game. That's where most of the value is.
I would endorse what the commissioner just said.
Would like to remind those that are participating via the teleconference, if you would like to ask a question, please press *1 on your telephone. We will go in-house over.
Bob, kind of following up with what Kirk just asked you. So did the current media rights play nothing into what you guys had to decide with the expansion? As far as, I mean, you know, you've heard the stories, we've read the stories, but anything to that the media partners wanted you not to expand?
As I said, we were in constant contact with them because of the discussions around the champ game, and you know, one of the things that we would like to have the opportunity for is to possibly start a third-tier network. And right now, Fox and ESPN have consent rights over that. We've had discussions around those components. We've talked about windows. You know, we kick it between 11 and 7. There's been some talk about massaging that window. There are always things that, I mean, we have very well articulated look-ins where we're constantly having discussions, but none of that stuff has been valued, and when we come to closure on it and when we have a deal, then, you know, we'll likely put out a joint release of some sort.
All right, we'll take our next question from teleconference participant Dennis Dodd. Dennis?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can, okay. This is for Bob. In March, Bob, you told me that if the Big 12 doesn't do anything in 12 years, it will be 20 million behind the SEC and the Big 10. Is that still the case, and is that still a concern, and why?
Well, we're always concerned about revenue, Dennis, and we're always going to be concerned about revenue. I think that one of the nice things about doing a championship game is that it both enhances revenue and it gives us a better chance to compete at the highest possible level. So I think we've taken a couple steps down the path, and as I mentioned earlier, we've got an RFP process that's going on that will also generate some additional revenue for us, and so we're constantly looking for opportunities. But you know, I don't know that there's anybody that's demonstrated a direct correlation between the amount of money spent and the number of championships that you win. I guess it would be fair to say that we'd not like to get 10 or 15 years henceforth and find out that if there was a delta, there wasn't any way we could fix it, and that it was going to make a big difference in how competitive we were. But you know, we reside in very fertile recruiting grounds. We have great coaches. We have great venues and great traditions, and I think that you know, we're always going to be concerned about revenue. And as we went through this process, we certainly looked at schools from the vantage point of are they additive? And I think there are many of them that are additive. Having said that, in the end, I think the additive nature of them was probably offset by some of the things that we might have to give up, like some of the traditional rivals and the full round robins and the double rounds in basketball. And so, you know, there's an evaluative process that goes on that is, as I said earlier, unique to individual institutions, but there's also collective evaluative process that goes on that's shared by all 10 of our institutions. And so is our finances always going to be a concern to us? Yeah, absolutely. And do we need to find innovative ways to generate revenue and to try and keep pace? Sure we do. We also need to make sure that we're keeping score on how you compete and what causes you to compete well. And, you know, taking on millions of dollars in debt isn't necessarily the way to do that. And there are many institutions that are deeply in hock, and fortunately, we have a lot of schools that have invested wisely and own their facilities and aren't carrying quite as much debt service. And so, you know, I think there's a case to be made for rational and thoughtful use of resources as well. So I think we continue to compete very well because we're well resourced, and as President Boren said, we just distributed the largest amount of money that we've ever distributed to our members, and so we expect that to increase. We have escalator clauses in all of our media contracts, and while you know, we are somewhat behind now, we're going to do everything we can not to have that delta grow, and it's going to force us to be smarter and better and more innovative, and to look at new distribution processes and systems and ways to monetize those things. So, you know, it's a constant challenge. I think as the commissioner, that's one of the responsibilities that my staff and I have, is to provide our member institutions with as much in the way of resources as we can. And so it's not I don't think there's one decision that's going to make that imperative go away. I think it's going to be constantly there, and we have to be mindful, and we have to keep score.
We have to, I think, again, I want to repeat the interest on the board in making sure that we have the ability to have flexibility as we approach new technologies, new platforms, new methods of distribution, so that we have the opportunity to do that in the conference, and that certainly is a concern of ours, along with all the other qualitative things the commissioner just talked about. In addition to the straight dollars, we're talking about those kinds of issues, but we're also talking about all of the great rivalry games, the other things that we need to have preserved as we move forward in whatever we do. But new technology is a big concern for us too.
Next, down here on the right, Chuck Carlton.
for both the commissioner and for President Bourne. From the standpoint of just the process, because back July 19th, it was a unanimous vote to pursue candidates and expansion. Now it's a unanimous vote against expansion. You went through a process of identifying upwards of close to 20 candidates, 11 finalists, all making presentations. What do you tell those schools at this point when you look at the entire process? Because we're getting some reaction right now from schools that seem somewhat upset by the way things turned out, and maybe justifiably so.
Well, I'm sure reasonable people can disagree on that. I've spoken with the president or chancellor at every one of the candidate institutions repeatedly during the process, including most recently this afternoon. They expressed gratitude at being a part of the process. They expressed disappointment. During the process, and I want to correct one of the things you said. The board did not make an expansion vote in July. They acted to charge me to go out and consider candidates, but there was no expansion vote taken, nor I don't think I think we were very careful not to have it construed as that, but it was an exploratory process. The schools all self-selected. We went through a process that was, I think, thoughtful and respectful of the schools, and we met repeatedly with the ADs and the presidents or chancellors at each of the institutions. It was a more transparent process than most of them have been. We wanted to be very careful not to commoditize great institutions and to view them as chess pieces on a board. We didn't do that, and I think it was a public and transparent but highly respectful process, and it was intended to be that. And so I think while there was disappointment on the part of schools that hoped they would be considered, I think our board made a decision today that emanated out of the decision they made in July, but they weren't the same decision. It wasn't the same consideration process. That was to look into the prospects, and this was to decide to go forward or not. And I think those are two very different processes. And when it came right down to it, I think the board acted in ways that were representative of their belief that we have something special, and that all 10 institutions are enthusiastically engaged in it, and that we had a bunch of good schools involved, but in the end, we felt like what we had was pretty good.
I certainly agree with everything the commissioner said about the process and the respectfulness of the process, and also what he said about the board action when we took the action. And the words were chosen very carefully. I've been asked by some of you in this room previously, several weeks ago, does that mean we're definitely expanding or definitely? And I said, no, it does not. Nor does it mean we're definitely not expanding. What we carefully drew the instruction to say from the board was that we instructed the commissioner to carefully consider and evaluate. We asked the commissioner to evaluate those schools who had expressed affirmative action or affirmative interest rather in the conference. So that was what passed. It wasn't a question of would we expand or not. We didn't take up that issue at that time. We instructed the commissioner to help us in our evaluation. So we've gone through a very thoughtful process all along the way, as I said a while ago. Part of that process was to explore a conference championship game. We did that to get the additional data point, for example, that could be helpful in many ways and helpful financially and in other ways. That was done. We explored the conference network, and we continued to kick those tires and hope that could happen and try to figure out ways. The marketplace, in essence, didn't respond. We wanted to look very thoroughly at whether it would be advantageous to us at this moment in time to undertake expansion. And we came to a conclusion unanimously that that was not the right thing to do at this particular point in time. But as I said a while ago, is all of this gathering of information a waste of time? To me, gathering of information is never a waste of time, whether we're gathering information about potential schools or whether expansion is the right thing to do at the time, whether we're gathering information about new technologies and what the options may be for us. All this gathering of information has been very helpful in the methodical way in which it's been done to the conference, and I think reaching what obviously all the members of the conference felt was the right decision today, the right decision on the championship game, the right decision on other things that will undoubtedly come before us in the future. And also, we have never said never. I think it's always unwise in this changing environment, this changing landscape, to ever say never. What we are saying, it's off the agenda as an active item. At this time, we're simply not going to expand. We don't want to keep people on tenterhooks about whether we are or not. We don't think that's fair. On the other hand, is having those schools having armed us with a tremendous amount of information about them, and they're fine institutions. Is that been a waste of their time? I think not, because we've come to know a lot more about them in this process, and who knows with this changing landscape when that information could be utilized and called into play. That's not to hold out any possibility that we're going to change and the next meeting we're going to expand. No, it's off the agenda right now. But it's does that mean forever? Does that mean down the road? None of us can predict the future. So gathering this information, I think, has not been a waste of time at all. I think it's been very helpful, and I think that every single president participated actively in this meeting. No one sat silent. No one failed to do their homework. And I think it was helpful to us, and I think it'll be helpful to us in the future. A lot of times in my experience in life is sometimes the door closes on something now, but who knows, down the road, who knows, when that door reopens or for some other reason it reopens and the circumstances change so gathering information has not been a waste of time.
Brief gentleman who wants to take this. What was the thought process behind the decision to go about the process the way you did it, as kind of soliciting candidates rather than, kind of open guessing? What was the reason?
Well, I'll let Commissioner can comment in more detail because he's been so actively involved in this process, and I think been actively involved in running a very fair and open process. But for one thing, of course, you don't want to be guilty of tortious interference with members who feel they're in one way or another bound to another conference. So this was not the Big 12 out trying to raid other conferences. This was the Big 12, in essence, inviting those people who were interested in us, those institutions who were interested in us, to let us know of their interest, and then for the commissioner to set up a process with which to evaluate those who voluntarily came forward and said we're interested. And so that's the reason we were very, very cautious to adhere to the appropriate legal boundaries, for example, in starting this process. And then the commissioner can add to again, he's talked about the fairness already, and I think I would just say from what I've observed of it, he has conducted this with absolute fairness and respect for all the institutions involved.
Well, thank you, David. That's certainly been our attempt. And, I don't honestly know what we expected at the very beginning. It was an opt-in process, and we had quite a few people self-identify, and as they did it, their colleague institutions said, well, they're raising their hand, why not us? And we were probably it was perhaps a little more of a sweepstakes than we might have thought it was going to be at the very beginning. But it was a very good process. We did some video conferences that were an hour long. We did some in-person interviews that were a couple hours. We exchanged a lot of information. We did a lot of background work. We had consultants that did deep dives on each of these institutions. It was very thorough, and it was above board. And we actually spent some time talking about not wanting to sneak around under cover of darkness, and especially not do that when we hadn't made the commitment to adding anyone. And so I just think it was the right process for us at the right time. Reasonable people can disagree about that, but in terms of being forthright and respectful and transparent, I think we did it about like we would have hoped it would. Would it have been the way that everyone would have chosen? Perhaps not, but it was a good process.
David Barron from the Houston Chronicle. How much time did the discussion of expansion take up during your meeting today?
Today and last night.
It was completed last night, you said?
No, I said last night and today. We started meeting last night.
No, but how much time during those meetings did that topic consume? And do you believe that the CEOs came to the meeting with their minds made up, or were minds changed during this discussion the last 2 days?
Well, I made an hour-and-a-half presentation, so I hope that had some influence on them. But
I certainly did. We appreciate the commissioners' presentations. I think that most people came to the meeting willing to listen very carefully. I think that what really impressed me about the tone in the room, and I would say that I didn't total up all the hours. It was an adequate time, maybe 5 hours of sometimes very philosophical discussions about our rivalries, discussions about our competitive program that we have now and how it operates, the cohesion that the conference has now. All these things were talked about, including, and around all of that was also our commitment to each other. I mean, that really came in as a part of the discussion of, do we feel the need to change just because, or are we worrying about being committed to each other? I think we all left the room feeling much stronger sense of commitment to the conference, commitment to each other, that all of us we're Big 12 people. We're proud to be part of this conference, and we want to always be a member of this conference as far as we're concerned, and we want to see it be all it can be. So a lot of very, very thoughtful discussion. A lot of questions were raised. So probably 5-6 hours in terms of just the general discussion. Now, what I do want to make clear again is discussion of any particular single school, University X, College Y, zero discussion, because we did not in terms, we thought first in terms of the sequence of decision making. You first decide, are we going to expand at this time? And the decision was no. Now, if the decision had been, we are going to expand at this time, of course, immediately we would have gone into a discussion of individual institutions and which institutions and so on. So we never got to that point because the first decision was made, and that made the second deep dive into discussion of individual schools moot. During the discussion of the broader question of expansion or no expansion, there was not any discussion or debate about particular schools.
Because you said there was no discussion about individual schools, I guess that leads me to ask, had there been a different group of individual schools, would that have changed the discussion any?
Well, I couldn't possibly speculate about that. We have the schools we had, and we had the situation we had, and we also just had the sense of, I would say, satisfaction of where you are. We feel like that we are in a very good situation at this point, and the sort of philosophy of do no harm To quote some other people have said it, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We feel a lot of confidence in the strength that we have in the conference, and so that contributed to our decision not to further expand at this point. We have a very good culture. I think that these schools are very comfortable with each other in terms of a lot of shared characteristics of our fan base, the kinds of people that are in our conference, and we feel good about that. As we have a real, let's say, these schools in the Big 12, they feel that we belong together, we have an affection for each other, we have an affinity for each other, and so do we. We want to, change or risk changing that culture in any way or other things. So I would just say it was more of a positive expression, as the commissioner said, about where we are right now as a conference, and the way we think we have our own destiny in our hands going forward in a very good way.
David, based on what you learned in this process, what you guys have gone through, do you see if your media rights deals were closer to expiring, do you think 10 schools moving forward would create the demand necessary, or do you feel like when you get to that point, based on what you now know, you're going to have to revisit this?
Well, I say, the commissioners described this as an ongoing process. It's an ongoing process of continuing to explore ways in which we might strengthen the conference. And those ways in which we might strengthen the conference may differ depending upon the time period that we're in. And who can predict? I've learned, my goodness, after a life in politics, I don't even predict election day right now. I've seen things that we're going through in the political landscape I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. So everything seems to be in a state of change, and where will we be? What will be the situation? What will be our position in the open market, as so to speak, as we examine what that market is? Where will our current media partners be in terms of their strength, even the way they're composed, for example? Will they be strictly linear? Will they themselves form partnerships that might be with digital platforms and other ways? Or will we have options with individual companies that are specializing in providing the digital side of things? I think there's so many unanswered questions that we just wouldn't be prepared to answer them at this point. But I think what we did feel was a sense of confidence that as we move along year after year after year, and all through this period of 8 years and then beyond it, when we have our new agreements, that we're going to be the Big 12. We're going to be the Big 12 united as it is now, and prepared to take appropriate advantage of what the situation is at that time.
Yeah, as an example, just as a follow-up on that, one of the examples I would cite for you is when you think about the number in your conference. If you're thinking about a linear network, there's an amount of inventory that's required to populate a linear network and also have multiple tiers of primary television packages. If you're in a digital environment or on a video on demand environment, you're not talking about 24/7, 365. You're talking about a very different process. And it's those kinds of questions that we dive into and look at, because they go directly to how much content you need. And so as that evolves, as President Warren said, we're going to be vigilant in watching those trends. And that makes it an exciting time to be involved right now, but it's very different than 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
Yeah, this is actually for Bob and for President Bourne. During your 90-minute presentation today, did you discuss individual schools? Is that part of the presentation? And then secondly, for both of you guys, were individual schools ever discussed previously in a meeting at any point?
I shared a lot of information after our in-person meetings with the board, and I've called our own board multiple times to take their temperature on what they saw, and that was the charge, was go out and do a deep dive on these people and using resources that we hired as consultants and also doing my own research and drawing upon 30 years on campus, I can feel like I'm in pretty good shape to make those kinds of assessments. But I think the process was a good one, and yes, there were times during my presentation when I made reference to individual institutions. I didn't make any recommendations because we never got to that point, and the board never asked me for them.
I think there was speculation. Now, let's say, for example, we start the meeting and we say, okay, they're all these schools and potential candidates. Are there 8 votes for this one, or 9 votes, or 10 votes for this one or that one? It did not happen. That's not the way our process went. I could see how people might consider that's the way the process. And so at the end of all discussing these individual schools, well, no one got this many votes or that many votes. It's not the way the process worked. We didn't get into that kind of discussion at all. We did get in, we were constantly backgrounded in terms of the commissioners' evaluations among the schools, but maybe evaluation's the wrong word. A summary of experiences with them, a summary of information mainly that they provided to us, but we didn't get into that kind of process that might be in your mind.
I think this probably is better for you, Bob, when you were in the process of getting into the candidates and exploring what they had to offer, given what's going on at Baylor and the tenor even of your forum you recently conducted with regard to sexual assault and domestic violence. How much was campus culture in that regard a factor for you in your search?
Well, I wouldn't tie it to anything that's gone on in our league per se, but we did a thorough Title IX investigation. Investigation's probably the wrong term, a review to ensure Title IX compliance and to make sure that institutions that we were looking at were meeting one of the 3 prongs of Title IX in terms of participation opportunities and scholarship allocations. We looked at that. We looked at, did a review of a lot of documents relative to NCAA violations and pending investigations and things like that. I mean, we did a very thorough investigation, and so I don't know that emanates from anything at Baylor or anyplace else. I just think that's part of your due diligence when you go through this kind of process.
The last question.
Did any of the Power 5 conference schools express any interest, even mild, in wanting to join the Big 12?
Well, Kirk, we should end the process the way that I began the process, and that is I'm not commenting on any of the candidate schools. I never have, and no need to start now.
All right,
I'm just trying to be consistent.
that will conclude the press conference. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here today, and for those that participated remotely via teleconference. There will be a complete transcript of today's press conference posted to the Big 12 website, big12sports.com, upon its receipt, which we anticipate will be in the next couple hours. Thank you, and have a good evening, everyone.